The first check arrived 3 weeks after my husband died, and for 7 years I never discovered who sent it. I'm Margaret Bennett, 72 years old, and if someone had told me that the greatest act of kindness in my life had been happening right in front of me for years without my knowledge, I would never have believed them. The story began on a cold November morning in Ohio, not long after we buried my husband, Richard. We had been married for 46 years. Long enough to finish each other's sentences. Long enough that silence itself felt wrong when he was gone. After the funeral, the house seemed larger than before. Every room echoed differently. The old grandfather clock in the hallway sounded louder. The refrigerator hummed through the night. Even the floorboards seemed to complain every time I walked across them alone. I spent most mornings sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that usually went cold before I finished half of it. Grief has a strange way of changing time. Some days felt like 10 minutes. Others felt like 10 years. Richard had always handled our finances. Not because I couldn't, but because it was simply how we divided responsibilities. After he passed away, I discovered that life was more expensive than I remembered. Property taxes had increased. Utility bills seemed higher every month. Prescription costs never stopped climbing. I wasn't starving, and I wasn't homeless, but I was learning very quickly that living alone on a fixed income required difficult choices. 3 weeks after the funeral, I opened my mailbox and found a plain white envelope. No return address. No note. Just a cashier's check for $800. At first I thought there had been some mistake. I examined every inch of the envelope. Nothing. I called the bank listed on the check, but they couldn't provide any information. Whoever purchased it had done so legally and privately. I assumed eventually someone would contact me and explain the error. Nobody did. A month later, another envelope arrived. This time the amount was $600. Again, no note. No explanation. No clues. I sat at my kitchen table staring at it for nearly an hour. The logical part of my mind told me not to touch it. But another part of me remembered the heating bill sitting unpaid on the counter. Eventually I deposited it. The money cleared. No problems. No phone calls. No questions. Then another envelope came. And another. Not always the same amount. Sometimes $500. Sometimes $800. Once it was $1,200 when my furnace broke during January. It felt almost impossible to believe. Every time a major expense appeared, somehow help arrived. I told nobody except my son Daniel. He was concerned at first. "Mom, are you sure this isn't some kind of scam?" he asked over the phone. "If it is," I replied, "it's the strangest scam I've ever seen." Daniel laughed, but neither of us had answers. His wife Emily sat quietly beside him during that conversation. I remember because I could hear dishes clinking in the background. Emily wasn't unfriendly. She was simply difficult to read. Some people fill a room with their personalities. Emily never did. She listened more than she spoke. Smiled more than she explained. Even after 12 years of marriage to my son, I often felt like I only knew the surface version of her. She asked polite questions during holidays. Remembered my birthday. Sent Christmas cards. But there was always a distance I couldn't quite cross. Looking back now, I wonder how blind I really was. The mysterious payments continued year after year. They arrived during emergencies. During difficult months. During moments when I was too proud to ask for help. I stopped trying to solve the mystery after a while. Instead, I began thinking of the sender as a guardian angel. Someone who somehow knew exactly when I needed support. Yet every year the question lingered. Who were they? Why were they helping me? And why did they never want credit? 7 years passed before I finally got my answer. And when the truth came out, it changed everything I thought I knew about my family. For a long time, I convinced myself that the mysterious help was nothing more than a blessing that had somehow found its way into my life. I stopped searching for explanations because searching only led to dead ends. Life continued, and I learned how to live inside a quieter version of the world. Every morning, I woke up around 6. Old habits are difficult to break. Richard had always been an early riser, and even years after his passing, my body still followed the schedule we built together. I would make coffee, open the kitchen curtains, and watch the neighborhood slowly wake up. Children waited for school buses. Neighbors walked their dogs. Delivery trucks rolled down the street. Everything seemed normal from the outside. Yet there were months when I sat at that kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills, wondering how far my savings would stretch. Inflation made everything harder. Groceries cost more. Home repairs seemed endless. Every season brought a new expense. One spring, a storm damaged part of my roof. Another year, my water heater stopped working without warning. There was always something. And somehow, just when I began worrying the most, another envelope would appear. It became such a strange pattern that I almost expected it. Not because I felt entitled to it, but because the timing was always so precise. Sometimes I would laugh to myself and say, well, whoever you are, you seem to know my life better than I do. Still, there were moments when this situation made me uncomfortable. Accepting help is not easy for people who spent decades taking care of everyone else. I had been a wife, a mother, a volunteer at church, the person who brought casseroles to grieving families and baked cookies for school fundraisers. I was used to giving. Receiving felt different. Receiving without knowing the source felt even stranger. During those years, Daniel and Emily visited often enough to stay involved in my life. They lived about 45 minutes away, close enough for holidays and occasional Sunday dinners. Daniel worked long hours managing operations for a manufacturing company. Emily taught 3rd grade at a local elementary school. They had 2 children, Olivia and Mason, who seemed to grow taller every time I saw them. Looking back, I can admit something I was not willing to admit then. I never truly understood Emily. She was kind, but quiet. Helpful, but private. If she brought over groceries, she would leave before I had the chance to thank her properly. If she fixed something around the house, she acted as though it was no big deal. She never drew attention to herself. At family gatherings, she often sat listening while everyone else talked. There was nothing wrong with her. In fact, everyone seemed to adore her. Yet I always felt there was a wall between us. Perhaps the wall existed only in my imagination. One Christmas stands out in my memory now. It was about 4 years before I learned the truth. We were gathered around my dining room table after dinner. Snow was falling outside, covering the backyard in a blanket of white. Olivia was showing me drawings from school while Mason was building something with blocks on the living room floor. Daniel was helping me carry dishes into the kitchen. Emily was wrapping leftovers in foil. Ordinary moments. The kind that seem insignificant at the time. I remember accidentally mentioning that I had postponed a dental procedure because the insurance did not cover enough of the cost. Daniel immediately looked concerned. "Mom, why did you not tell me?" he asked. I brushed it off. "It can wait," I said. "It is not urgent." Emily looked up from the counter. For a second, our eyes met. There was concern in her expression. Genuine concern. Then she looked away and continued wrapping leftovers. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived containing exactly the amount I needed for the procedure. No note. No explanation. Just enough money to cover the remaining balance. At the time, I chalked it up to another coincidence. Now, years later, that memory returned to me differently. Not as an isolated event, but as a piece of a larger puzzle. Yet back then, I remained unaware. Life moved forward. The envelopes continued. The mystery remained unsolved. And the person responsible sat across from me at family dinners, smiling politely while I thanked fate for kindness that had never really come from fate at all. The first crack in the mystery appeared on a warm May afternoon during Olivia's high school graduation. It was one of those perfect spring days that seemed designed for celebration. The sky was clear. The temperature hovered around 75 degrees. Families filled the football field with cameras, flowers, and proud smiles. I sat between Daniel and Emily in the bleachers while we waited for the ceremony to begin. Olivia looked beautiful in her cap and gown. Watching her walk across that stage filled me with the same pride I had felt when Daniel graduated all those years ago. After the ceremony, we gathered for lunch at a local restaurant. The place was crowded with other families celebrating their graduates. Conversations overlapped. Glasses clinked. Servers moved quickly between tables. Everyone seemed happy. At first, it was just another family meal. We talked about college plans. Olivia spoke excitedly about her dorm room. Mason teased her about moving away. Daniel joked that he would finally get the bathroom to himself. Then something happened that seemed insignificant in the moment. One of Daniel's longtime friends joined us unexpectedly. He had known our family for years and stopped by the table to congratulate Olivia. During the conversation, he smiled at Emily and said, "You always have been the generous one." Emily immediately looked uncomfortable. "What do you mean?" Daniel asked casually. His friend laughed. "You know exactly what I mean. Most people would not have done what she did all those years." For a second, nobody spoke. Emily quickly changed the subject. "How is your wife doing?" she asked. The conversation shifted. Everyone moved on. Yet something about the exchange stayed with me. I noticed the way Emily avoided eye contact afterward. I noticed the way Daniel seemed slightly puzzled. More importantly, I noticed how quickly the topic had disappeared. On the drive home, I found myself replaying those words. Most people would not have done what she did all those years. What exactly had she done? The question followed me for days. I told myself I was overthinking. Perhaps it was related to school volunteering or church activities. Perhaps it was something involving Olivia or Mason when they were younger. There were dozens of innocent explanations. Even so, the feeling would not leave me. About 2 weeks later, I was organizing old paperwork in the filing cabinet beside my desk. It was a task I had postponed for years. Folders had accumulated. Receipts, insurance documents, tax records, warranty papers. The sort of clutter every homeowner collects over time. As I sorted through the stack, a folded bank document slipped from one of the folders and landed on the floor. I almost threw it away without reading it. Then I noticed the date. It matched the year I had received one of the earliest anonymous payments. Curious, I unfolded it. The document was a deposit confirmation. Nothing unusual about that. Except for one detail. The branch location listed on the form was not near my house. It was located near the elementary school where Emily taught. I stared at the paper longer than I should have. My heart was not racing. I was not shocked. It was simply a strange coincidence. At least that was what I told myself. Still, after all those years, I had learned something about coincidences. The larger the mystery, the fewer coincidences actually exist. That evening, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the kitchen window. The neighborhood was quiet. Street lights flickered on one by one. I thought about Emily. About her reserved personality. About the concern I occasionally caught in her eyes when she thought nobody was looking. About every envelope that had arrived exactly when I needed it most. For the first time, a thought entered my mind that I immediately rejected. Then it returned. What if the person helping me had never been a stranger at all? What if the answer had been sitting across from me at family dinners for years while I searched everywhere else? For several days, I tried to ignore the suspicion. It felt unfair. After all, I had no proof. A branch address on an old document was not evidence. A strange comment at a graduation party was not evidence. They were only fragments. Loose threads. Yet once a question enters your mind, it becomes difficult to silence. I began noticing things I had overlooked for years. Small things. The kind of details that seem meaningless until they are placed beside one another. One Saturday afternoon, Emily stopped by unexpectedly while Daniel was helping Mason with a school event. She brought a container of homemade chicken soup and a loaf of fresh bread. Nothing unusual about that. She had done similar things before. We sat at the kitchen table while I poured coffee. The conversation drifted from gardening to Olivia's first semester of college. Ordinary topics. Comfortable topics. Then she glanced toward the hallway where I kept my filing cabinet. "How is the roof holding up these days?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. "The roof?" I repeated. "It is fine." Emily nodded. "Good. I remember it gave you trouble a few years ago." I studied her face for a moment. Most people had forgotten about the roof repair years earlier. Even I rarely thought about it anymore. Yet Emily remembered. Not only remembered, but seemed relieved by the answer. Later that evening, after she left, I found myself thinking about the timing again. The expensive roof repair had happened during one of the years when the anonymous payments had increased. Coincidence? Another coincidence. At least that was the explanation I kept giving myself. A week later, I opened another drawer in the filing cabinet and discovered something else. Tucked between old insurance statements was a receipt from the dental procedure I had undergone years before. The remaining balance had been paid in full. Attached to the receipt was a handwritten note from the office manager. "Thank you for resolving the balance so quickly." The wording stopped me. I had not resolved the balance. The mysterious payment had. Curious, I called the dental office. I did not expect them to have records after so many years, but to my surprise, they did. The woman on the phone was kind and patient. She confirmed that the balance had been paid through a certified payment. When I asked whether she could identify the sender, she apologized. Privacy policies prevented her from sharing personal information. Then she hesitated. "I can tell you one thing," she said. "The person who paid specifically requested that you never be informed." I thanked her and hung up. My hands rested quietly on the table afterward. Requested that I never be informed. Those words echoed through my mind. Not anonymous by accident. Anonymous on purpose. Whoever had been helping me wanted no recognition. No gratitude. No attention. That realization affected me more than anything else. Most people enjoy being thanked. Most people want acknowledgement. This person wanted the opposite. The following Sunday, I attended church as usual. After the service, I found myself speaking with Linda Parker, an old friend who had known our family for decades. During the conversation, she mentioned Emily. "Your daughter-in-law has always had a good heart," she said. I smiled politely. "Yes, she does." Linda nodded. "Some people help quietly. Those are usually the ones doing the most." The comment was innocent. She probably had no idea how deeply it struck me. Driving home, I realized a pattern was emerging. Not facts. Not proof. But a pattern. Every clue seemed to point in the same direction. Every memory I revisited looked different now. The concern in Emily's eyes. The careful questions. The moments when she knew details about my life that I never remembered sharing. That night, I sat alone in the living room with an old photo album open on my lap. Pictures of birthdays. Holidays. Family vacations. Years of memories frozen inside glossy pages. In photograph after photograph, Emily stood slightly off to the side. Never drawing attention to herself. Never demanding the spotlight. Just quietly present. I stared at one particular picture from years ago. Olivia was blowing out birthday candles. Daniel was laughing. Mason was reaching for a piece of cake. And Emily was looking toward me instead of the camera. There was something in that expression. Concern. affection. Perhaps even protectiveness. For the first time, a possibility formed in my mind that no longer felt impossible. If Emily truly was connected to the mystery, then the story was much bigger than I had imagined. And somewhere ahead, hidden beneath years of silence, the truth was waiting for me. Once the suspicion took hold, I could not simply let it go. I was 72 years old, and I had learned that instincts rarely appear without reason. Still, I did not want to accuse anyone in my mind without proof. Emily deserved better than that. So instead of jumping to conclusions, I decided to do something I had not done in years. I started paying attention. Not to Emily herself, but to the trail left behind by the mystery. Over the next several weeks, I pulled out old records and organized them chronologically. Medical bills. Home repair invoices. Insurance statements. Tax documents. Receipts from pharmacies and contractors. My dining room table disappeared beneath stacks of paper. It looked less like a home and more like the office of a determined investigator. The deeper I dug, the stranger the pattern became. Every major financial crisis seemed to have been softened by an anonymous payment. When the furnace failed during a harsh January winter, help arrived. When the roof needed repairs after a storm, help arrived. When prescription costs suddenly increased, help arrived. The timing was almost impossible to ignore. Whoever was helping me was not acting randomly. They understood exactly what was happening in my life. One afternoon, I discovered something that made me stop sorting papers altogether. Several years earlier, I had undergone a series of medical tests after experiencing persistent fatigue. The costs had been higher than expected. I remembered sitting at this very table worrying about how I would manage the bills. As I reviewed the documents, I noticed that the anonymous payment had arrived less than a week after I received the invoice. Less than a week. Very few people even knew about those medical expenses. I had not told friends. I had not discussed it at church. The only people who knew were Daniel and Emily. I sat back in my chair and stared at the paperwork. The room felt unusually quiet. Outside, a lawn mower hummed somewhere down the street. A dog barked in the distance. Ordinary sounds. Yet my thoughts were no longer ordinary. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider the possibility seriously. What if Emily had known every detail because she was never on the outside of the mystery? What if she had been standing at the center of it all along? A few days later, another clue appeared when I least expected it. I stopped by a local hardware store to replace a broken garden tool. While checking out, the manager recognized me. We exchanged polite conversation, and somehow the topic shifted to home maintenance. He smiled and said, "Your daughter-in-law is one of the most thoughtful people I know." I blinked. "Emily shops here often?" He nodded. "Not as much lately, but she used to come in all the time asking questions about repairs around your place." I felt my stomach tighten slightly. "My place?" "Sure," he said casually. "Years ago she was always trying to learn enough to help with little projects. Said she wanted to make things easier for family." He thought nothing of the comment. Why would he? Yet I carried those words home with me. That evening, I sat on my back porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and gold. Memories began returning one after another. Emily offering to drive me to appointments. Emily showing up with groceries during difficult winters. Emily quietly replacing a faulty smoke detector without mentioning it. Emily remembering details that most people forgot. Piece by piece, the image I had carried of her for years started changing. I had always viewed her as distant. Reserved. Hard to read. But perhaps silence and indifference were not the same thing. Perhaps I had confused privacy with lack of affection. As darkness settled over the yard, I looked toward the empty chair where Richard used to sit during summer evenings. I often wondered what advice he would have given me if he were still here. For some reason, I could almost hear his voice. "Be patient, Margaret. Let the truth come to you." And for the first time, I felt certain that the truth was closer than ever. I just did not realize that the next clue would come from someone who had been watching the entire story unfold from the beginning. The person who moved me closer to the truth was not a banker, a contractor, or a member of my family. It was my old neighbor, Helen Crawford. Helen and I had lived on the same street for nearly 20 years before she moved into a retirement community across town. We still met for lunch every few months. One Thursday afternoon, we sat together in a small cafe overlooking a park. The conversation wandered through the usual subjects: health, grandchildren, the weather. Then she asked a simple question. "How is Emily doing these days?" I smiled. "She is doing well." Helen stirred her tea and nodded thoughtfully. "She always was a remarkable young woman." Something in her tone made me look up. "You sound very certain about that." Helen laughed softly. "Because I am." She took a sip of tea before continuing. "You probably never knew this, but after Richard passed away, Emily used to stop by your house all the time." I frowned. "She visited occasionally." Helen shook her head. "No, Margaret. I mean when you were not home." My heart skipped slightly. "What do you mean?" Helen leaned back in her chair. "I used to see her car parked outside. Sometimes she would mow the lawn if it needed attention. Sometimes she carried groceries inside. Once I watched her spend nearly an hour checking your gutters after a storm." I stared at her. "She never mentioned any of that." "That is because she never wanted credit." Helen said it so casually that it almost took my breath away. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sounds of the cafe seemed distant. Cups clinked. People chatted. A server carried plates past our table. Yet all I could think about was Emily climbing a ladder to check gutters while making sure nobody knew she had been there. Helen continued. "I remember asking her once why she did not simply tell you. She smiled and said, because helping someone is not supposed to be about being noticed." I looked down at my hands. Those words sounded exactly like Emily. Quiet. Practical. Completely sincere. Helen must have noticed the expression on my face because she softened her voice. "Margaret, I hope you do not mind me saying this, but I always thought she cared about you deeply." Deeply. The word stayed with me all afternoon. After lunch, I drove home slowly. Every traffic light seemed longer than usual. Every mile gave me more time to think. By the time I pulled into my driveway, memories were returning faster than I could process them. I remembered the winter when my driveway was mysteriously cleared of snow before I woke up. I remembered finding groceries on my porch after a severe storm. I remembered small repairs that somehow got done before I had the chance to arrange them myself. At the time, I had attributed those moments to generous neighbors or good fortune. Now another possibility stood before me. That evening, I opened an old photo box I had not touched in years. I was not searching for anything specific. I simply wanted to think. As I sorted through photographs, a folded receipt slipped from between two pictures and landed on the floor. I picked it up. The date immediately caught my attention. It was from the year my furnace failed. The receipt showed a payment toward emergency heating repairs. At the bottom was a handwritten note from the technician. Customer's daughter requested immediate service. Daughter. Not daughter-in-law. Daughter. I sat perfectly still. The technician had not seen a distinction. To him, the woman making sure I had heat during winter was simply my daughter. My eyes drifted toward the family photographs spread across the table. For years I had been searching for a stranger. For years I had imagined some anonymous benefactor watching over me from afar. Yet the evidence was beginning to point somewhere much closer. Somewhere so close that I wondered how I had missed it for so long. And deep down, another realization was beginning to form. If Emily had truly done all these things without seeking recognition, then I had only uncovered a small part of the story. The biggest sacrifice was still hidden from me. The breakthrough came from Daniel, although he did not realize he was giving it to me. A few weeks after my conversation with Helen, I invited him over for lunch while Emily attended a teacher training seminar. We sat on the back porch eating sandwiches and watching squirrels dart across the yard. The conversation started normally. Work. Family. Olivia's grades. Mason's plans for the summer. Then Daniel mentioned something that caught my attention immediately. Emily has always been better at sacrificing than I am, he said with a laugh. She has been doing that since the beginning. I tried to keep my voice casual. What do you mean? He leaned back in his chair. You remember when we almost bought that larger house about 8 years ago? I shook my head. Vaguely. Well, we had the financing approved. The paperwork was ready. Everything was set. He smiled faintly. Then Emily changed her mind. I listened carefully. Why? Daniel looked out across the yard for a moment. At the time, she told me it was not the right financial decision. I thought she was just being cautious. He paused. Later I realized there was more to it. My heart began beating a little faster. More to it? He nodded. A few years after that, I discovered she had been quietly setting money aside during the same period. Not for herself. Not for us. For family emergencies. I remained silent. Daniel continued speaking, unaware of the storm building inside me. That was always Emily. If she had a choice between something she wanted and something someone else needed, she chose the other person every time. I stared down at my untouched lunch. Suddenly the pieces that had been scattered for years began moving closer together. The house they never bought. The anonymous payments. The constant timing of the assistants. The quiet sacrifices nobody talked about. That evening I sat alone with those thoughts. The sun had already set. The house was dark except for the lamp beside my chair. I thought about all the things people give up without announcing them. Dreams. Plans. Opportunities. We often notice generosity only when it is visible. We rarely notice what someone chooses not to take for themselves. The next clue arrived unexpectedly a few days later. Olivia stopped by on her way home from college. While helping me organize some old boxes in the garage, she came across a stack of family photographs. We spent nearly an hour looking through them together. Then she picked up one picture and smiled. I remember this year, she said. Mom worked 2 jobs. I looked at her. 2 jobs? Olivia nodded. For almost a year. She taught during the day and tutored students at night. I felt a chill run through me. Why? Olivia shrugged. I never really knew. Dad always said she was saving for something important. After Olivia left, I sat alone in the garage holding that photograph. Emily looked exhausted in the picture. Her smile was there, but her eyes carried the fatigue of someone pushing herself beyond comfort. I tried to remember that period. Slowly, details surfaced. Emily arriving late to family dinners. Emily looking tired during holidays. Emily leaving gatherings early because she had work the next morning. At the time, I had barely questioned it. Now those memories looked completely different. One memory returned more clearly than the others. During that same year, one of the largest anonymous payments had arrived. Nearly enough to solve a financial problem that had been keeping me awake at night. Back then, I called it a miracle. Now I was beginning to suspect it had another name. I looked around the garage at decades of accumulated memories. Family bicycles. Holiday decorations. Old tools. Boxes filled with photographs. Every family carries stories hidden beneath the surface. Stories nobody notices until years later. And as I sat there surrounded by evidence of a life already lived, one truth became impossible to ignore. If Emily had truly spent years working harder, spending less, and quietly giving up things she wanted in order to help someone else, then the mystery was no longer about money. It was about love expressed so quietly that I had almost missed it entirely. Yet one question still remained. Why had she gone to such extraordinary lengths to keep it secret from me? The answer arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when I was searching for something completely unrelated. I had decided to clean out a storage closet in the guest room, one of those projects people postpone for years because there is never a perfect time. Inside were old holiday decorations, boxes of paperwork, and several containers that had belonged to Richard. Most of it was exactly what I expected. Then I found a small wooden box tucked behind a stack of photo albums. It was one I had not opened since shortly after his passing. Inside were letters, greeting cards, and personal notes collected over decades. I sat on the floor and carefully sorted through them. Some made me smile. Some brought tears to my eyes. Then I noticed an envelope with Emily's name written on the front in Richard's handwriting. My heart stopped. The envelope had never been sealed. It appeared to be a copy rather than an original letter. For several seconds, I simply stared at it. Then I unfolded the paper inside. Richard had written it a few months before his death. The letter was not long, but every sentence carried weight. He thanked Emily for loving Daniel. He thanked her for the way she treated our family. Then I reached the section that changed everything. Richard wrote that he worried about me. He knew I would struggle after he was gone. Not only financially, but emotionally. He knew I would try to handle everything alone. He knew I would refuse help whenever possible. As I continued reading, my vision blurred with tears. Richard had written that if anything ever happened to him, he hoped someone would quietly watch over me. Not because I was incapable, but because he understood how stubborn pride could become when mixed with grief. Then came the sentence that left me completely speechless. He told Emily that she possessed a rare gift for caring about people without making them feel dependent. He said he trusted her judgment. He trusted her kindness. And he trusted her heart. I read those lines 3 times. By the end, my hands were trembling. The letter did not explicitly ask Emily to help me. Yet the meaning was impossible to miss. Richard had seen something in her long before I did. He had understood her character in a way I never fully appreciated. I sat there on the closet floor for nearly an hour. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The house remained silent around me. Memory after memory returned. Emily bringing groceries. Emily checking on repairs. Emily asking careful questions about my health. Emily quietly stepping in whenever life became difficult. Suddenly another realization struck me. None of those actions had been dramatic. None had drawn attention. She never announced sacrifices. She never kept score. She never positioned herself as a hero. She simply helped. Consistently. Patiently. Year after year. I thought about the larger house Daniel mentioned. The second job Olivia remembered. The countless anonymous payments. The repairs. The emergencies. The hidden acts of kindness that had shaped the last 7 years of my life. The deeper truth was no longer difficult to see. Emily had not been helping me occasionally. She had quietly built an entire safety net beneath me while making sure I never felt ashamed for needing it. And somehow she had managed to do it without expecting recognition. As evening approached, I carried the letter into the living room and sat beside the lamp Richard used to read under every night. I read it once more. This time I noticed a sentence near the end that I had overlooked before. Richard wrote that true love is often invisible while it is happening. People usually recognize it only when they stop looking at words and start looking at actions. I closed the letter slowly. For years I had searched for the identity of a mysterious benefactor. I had imagined strangers, charities, forgotten friends, and countless other possibilities. Yet the answer had been standing in front of me the entire time. And now that I finally understood the truth, I realized something even more important remained ahead. Emily still did not know that I knew. And very soon, that was about to change. 3 days later, I invited the entire family to dinner. I did not tell anyone why. I simply said that I wanted us all together. By 6 o'clock, the dining room was filled with familiar voices. Daniel was helping set the table. Olivia and Mason were arguing playfully about a movie. Emily was arranging a salad in the kitchen. Everything looked normal. Yet for me, nothing felt normal anymore. For years I had lived inside a mystery. Now I was sitting across from the person who had quietly changed my life, and she had no idea that I finally knew the truth. During dinner, I found myself watching Emily more than anyone else. Not in suspicion. Not in confusion. In gratitude. I noticed the small things that had always been there. The way she made sure everyone else was served before sitting down herself. The way she listened when others spoke. The way she smiled when Olivia shared a story from college. There was nothing dramatic about her. Nothing that demanded attention. And perhaps that was exactly why I had failed to see her clearly for so long. After dessert, I stood and carried a small wooden box into the dining room. Conversation stopped. Daniel looked puzzled. Olivia and Mason exchanged curious glances. Emily appeared confused. I placed the box on the table and took a slow breath. "There is something I want to share," I said. The room became completely quiet. My voice trembled slightly at first, but then steadied. I told them about the anonymous payments. About the envelopes that had arrived for 7 years. About the roof repairs, the medical bills, the emergencies, and the countless moments when help had appeared exactly when I needed it. Everyone listened carefully. Daniel seemed surprised by how much assistance had arrived over the years. Olivia and Mason looked fascinated. Emily remained silent. Then I told them about the clues I had uncovered. The conversations. The receipts. The memories. The letter from Richard. At the mention of the letter, Emily lowered her eyes. I looked directly at her. "I know it was you," I said softly. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The silence felt almost sacred. Emily stared at me as if she did not know what to say. Daniel slowly turned toward her. "Emily?" he asked quietly. She looked around the table and then back at me. I noticed tears forming in her eyes. Not dramatic tears. Just the kind that appear when someone has carried something heavy for a very long time. "I never wanted you to find out," she whispered. I smiled through my own tears. "I know." She shook her head gently. "I was not trying to hide something important. I just did not want you to feel like a burden. You never were." Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Emily continued. She explained that after Richard passed away, she saw how determined I was to remain independent. She knew that offering direct help would often be refused. She knew that pride and grief sometimes walk hand in hand. So she found other ways. Quiet ways. Respectful ways. She never wanted gratitude. She never wanted recognition. She simply wanted me to have support when I needed it. Daniel looked stunned. He admitted that he never knew the full extent of what she had done. Olivia began crying openly. Mason stared at his mother with an expression of admiration I will never forget. As for me, I could barely speak. Finally, I reached across the table and took Emily's hand. "For years," I said, "I thought I was being helped by a stranger." My voice broke. But it turns out I was being loved by family. Emily squeezed my hand. In that moment, I understood something Richard had known long before I did. Character is not revealed through grand speeches. It is revealed through quiet choices repeated over time. The greatest acts of love are often invisible while they are happening. They appear in sacrifices nobody announces. In kindness that expects nothing in return. In people who show up again and again without asking for credit. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone at the kitchen table where so much of this story had unfolded. The house no longer felt quite so empty. Richard was gone. That grief would always remain. But another feeling had taken its place beside the sadness. Peace. Because after all those years, I finally understood that I had never been alone. Someone had been standing beside me the entire time. And the person I once struggled to understand had become one of the greatest blessings of my life.